All right, let's keep building out our form here. When we left off, we had a first name field, last name, gender, and child fields. Now, what we want to do now is track changes to each of these fields and store them in a state in React so that once we have all the different fields we want, including on all the people, we can submit all that state into our Ruby backend and let the Ruby backend submit it to Planning Center as the API request. Now, one thing we need to do is decide how we want to structure our data in React. Now, if we go to the Planning Center API documentation in this introduction here, the Planning Center API tries as best it can to conform to the JSON API 1.0 specification. Now you can read some of the benefits here, but let's look at this gotcha. Resources are wrapped in an object that looks like this. So we have the beginning of the JSON. Everything's in a data tag. And then within that data tag, we have the type equals thing. In this case, it's going to be a person. And it has an ID. In this case, we don't have one. But we also have this attributes. And all these attributes of the thing that we're creating, in this case a person, will be wrapped in this attributes tag. So I like the fact that we could store the JSON in React as attributes dot last name, attributes dot first name, attributes dot gender. That way when we pass it to our Ruby backend, it'll be already pretty much formatted how we want it to go to Planning Center. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say that we're going to have an attributes piece of our state. And as we update the fields in our form, we're going to be updating that state inside the attributes. So let's go back to our code here. We're going to be using the new React stuff. So we're not going to be using set state or any of that stuff. We're going to be using hooks. So we're going to use state, import that from React as well. And let's create a constant of attributes, and set attribute. I keep doing a V instead of a B, equals use state. In this case, we need an empty state, so an initial state rather. So let's, we know we're going to need a first name. Let's make that blank. We know we're going to need a last name. We know we're going to need a gender. Let's make that male because that's actually no, we're going to leave that blank as well because we're going to allow a no option there. And then we're going to have child. In this case, we're going to default to false because that's the default Planning Center. All right, so that's going to be our initial state. Let me save that. It's going to format it nicely for us so we can view it a little bit better. Now, how do we use this state? In this case, let's go through here. And in our input, we want to use a controlled input here. So we can say our value is going to be our attributes dot first name. So now whenever this form loads up, whatever attributes we're going to have in the state is going to be put here in the value. So just for an example, let's instead of having a placeholder here and with an empty state, let's say the state is initialized with Jeffrey. So you can see here it's actually already pre-filled with Jeffrey, which is pretty nice. But in this case, we don't want it Jeffrey. We want it to be whatever the first name is in the state at the time. On initial render, obviously it's going to be empty, but as we go, we're going to be updating that state. So I'm going to copy this. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to go ahead and add it to each of these others. So in this case, value equals attributes last name. And then for the select, you put the value in the select tag itself in React. So value equals attributes.gender. And for the child, this is going to be a little bit different because we have to decide whether or not the child is true or false. And you can't really set it for one for both. You got to do each individually. So in this case, we'll say selected equals, and then we're going to say attributes.child. In this case, we want it to be not child. So if it's an adult, we were expecting it to be false. So if child is true, then obviously it's going to be adult. So here we want to do the opposite. So attributes.child. Save that. It's going to make it all nice looking for us. Let's go back to our form here. Let me go ahead and open up our developer tools just to make sure we're not getting any errors, which we are. And here it says, you provided a value prop to a form field without an on-change handler. We're going to be taking care of that in a minute. So here we have all our information here. One thing I noticed is when I reload, it's not being pre-populated with adult here. So let's take a look at what's going on there. Selected equals not attributes child. Let's go back up to child here. So child is false. So that should be true. You know what? It may be checked instead of selected. Let's try that. There we go. We also have another on change issue going on there, but then again, we're going to take care of that in a minute. You can see I'm kind of doing this as I go, so I'm going to hit some errors. You're going to hit some errors. We'll work through them together. Okay, sounds good. Now, so we have all our initial state set. What do we do when we want to update that state? Let's change the first name first. So in this case, we can add that onChange handler that React was complaining about. In this case, we're going to be provided with an event. I'm going to use the hash rocket here. Or the stabby arrow, I guess you could call it. In this case, we want to not overwrite the entire attributes field, but we do want to update just the first name in the attributes. What we can do there is say set attributes, which is the function that will be called, and whatever we provide this function is going to be what the attributes will be after this is called. So inside we're going to want, again, an object, and we're going to have all the attributes. So this is kind of the spread operator, and we're going to spread all the attributes out. So it's going to take all the current attributes, so all the things that are currently here, and reset them. But we're going to overwrite the first name portion of those attributes with the value of the target of the event that we're getting. So again, E is the event. I can name that a little bit better. I usually just do E because it makes it nice and short, but for clarity, let's say event. So the event target, which is going to be this input field here, we're going to event target value. So the value of the input field is going to go into the first name. So as we're spreading out these attributes, the first name is one of the attributes, so it will be spread out here. But because we put first name after those attributes, it's going to overwrite the original attributes. In fact, if we put another first name in here, it would overwrite anything else that we have before it. So you can see the further right you go, the more precedence it has in terms of overwriting. So let's save that and see what we get. That's going to re-render. We're going to change this. And we're not seeing anything, but if we go to React Components here, go to our form and our state, we can see our first name is now that crazy input here. Let's change that to Jeffrey. So you can see as I'm typing, it's updating that our first name is now Jeffrey in our state on our form. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. So we also want to do the same thing with last name. So back down here, let's add an onChange handler. In this case, I am just going to name it E for not clarity, but succinctness. We're going to set attributes again. And again, we're going to spread out all the attributes, so we're not overwriting the rest of them. But we do want to overwrite last name. In that case, we want to take the event target value. And again, the event is the typing or the change. And the target is what the change was on, the HTML entity that was on. In this case, it's the input value or input field, and then the value of that target, which in this case is the value of the input field as we're talking or typing. Save that. I missed a closing tag there. So let's do this. Now let's take a look at the state again. We have empty state, last name Lessel, and we have our last name and our state. Perfect. The interesting thing is, we can change the state over here in the component. So you can see, even though I'm not typing in the field itself, if I change the state in the component in the React tools, I can change hit enter, I can change the component, because remember, we said that the component value, this input value, is going to be whatever's in state and in attributes and our last name. So that's exactly what we see here. It's perfect. All right, so let's go down to our select. You might think that we take the onChange handler for the options themselves or anything like that, but it's actually on the select itself. So let's do it after the value just to be consistent. onChange equals, in this case, we're going to have an event again, and we're going to set our attributes. We're going to spread out those attributes, but overwrite the gender attribute with the target's value. You're starting to notice a pattern, I hope. All right, so let's see what we can do here. Let's take a look at our state. As I change this, our state should be updated, and it does. We got M and F. Perfect. Finally, let's do our child. Our onChange on our input is going to be a little bit different because it's not an overriding field. It's each individual fields. So let's do onChange equals In this case, we don't need the event because we know, since on an individual field, we know what the field value is going to be. So we can say set attributes, spread out those attributes, but overwrite the child. This is for the adult field. So if they select this, the child's going to be false. I'm going to copy that and paste that down here because it's pretty much the same except the child is true. Save that. Go back over to our browser, take a look at our state, adult, child. If I highlight that child, now that the child is checked in our state, go back to adult, you can see that that updates our state too. So that's working as intended. So all this now is working as intended. We have all our state hooked up. I can fill out everything, and our attributes are now in state. Perfect. So the next thing we can do is use that state to, use this component to build up more people. In this case, you can only fill in a form for one person. We want to be able to do more than one at a time. So next, we're going to take out this component we've built, kind of extract it into its own component that we can reuse multiple times, and then, of course, reuse it.